Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Metaphysical Marketplace, here to provide you and your naturally special gifts with guidance and support through your life's journey, providing you tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, oils, crystals, and much more. Visit them at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, or online at spiritoftepereth.com. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leader in charge, ADOS, or the American descendants of ADOS. The controversial group ADOS. ADOS, or the American descendants of the controversial group ADOS. ADOS, the American descendants of the controversial group ADOS. The controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American descendants of slavery, our friends, and our allies. You can find us every Friday, 10 a.m. on WCRS 92.7 and 98.3 here in Columbus, Ohio. Or you can still listen on your favorite podcast app. This is episode 21. I am your host, Lisa Todd, along with my co-host,
Daoud Giazan. On today's show, we will share articles from the Moguldom Nation, Politico, the Columbus Dispatch, Black Agenda Report, imixwhatilike.org, and the Seattle Times. Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we dive into and discuss the letter entitled Open Letter from the original Black Panther Party members to Black hip-hop artists who have an interest in our community.
Personality.
Peace.
This week in our personality piece, I'm going to pose a question that forces us to have personalities.
What questions do you have for us this week?
Well, I came up with one real quick on the spot because I forgot to do it.
I can tell.
Right? And that is, does economic power equal political power?
If it's looked at simply, yes, but it's a little bit more complicated in that, depending on the focus of the population in terms of what they deem important collectively, and as well as the big gripe is how they spend their money. So yes, if those factors are those variables are not out of whack or out of pain, yes, economics can result in what people want, the collective wants, out of political power or political exertion of one's will.
And I've heard this, and we were watching the video before this, but that's not the only place I've heard this sentiment. And I've heard it with other YouTubers. I've heard it with other economists. Dr. Claude Anderson alludes to this. Mm-hmm. When it comes to having economic power, we know that we've been shut out in America. ADOS community has been shut out. Mm-hmm. So where will we get our economic power from? I mean, it's one thing, okay, we have income, but we use that income for our daily living expenses. There's not much room for recreational for a lot of us, or discretionary income that we can use towards, using that for our money for political issues, which means is we're rarely going to donate to a political candidate because we don't have that discretionary income. So therefore, we don't have the income, we don't have the power to influence a politician, therefore our needs don't get addressed. So it's like a cycle of perpetual non-political power in this country. And the answer that most of us feel is voting, which, I'm sorry, has not resulted in the very necessary changes and dramatic changes that our community needs. So can economic power mean political power? Yes, if you have economics. We don't have economics.
Not collectively anyway, yes. Now we do have it in pockets. The baby boomers have 75% of our wealth, and we don't think of it in terms of that when we talk generally. We just talk about it in terms of economic power. Just two things. One, it's within 75% of Black America, which is composed of the baby boomer group. That's one thing. That's a limitation, but that's where a lot of the source is. So that's why that on the ground level, if there is a concentration of baby boomers who have that level of wealth, then on the local, maybe even state level, we can make some changes. The issue is, do we have the impact politically on a national level? And we collectively don't, even with the baby boomers collectively. Maybe on single issues, we can possibly exert our political power, but again, we'd have to be on the same boat and all the other things I mentioned earlier. The second thing is we've been deluded in a lot of ways as to what is meant by economic power. We continue to use it generally and pretend that it can just be focused economically towards political interest. The reality is that it was a term created by marketers out of the 1940s and 50s who wanted to better utilize or gain access to Black spending habits, which they interpreted as power as a communication source between themselves and other marketers and other businesses and white businesses. How could they utilize the power that Black people have in terms of the disposable incomes? It wasn't seen as a means of exerting economic power to exert political power and benefit. Because we get confused on that, we allow that terminology to then dictate and criticize ourselves for not doing that. Well, it was never meant to do that. Those marketers who created the term spending power, particularly Black spending power, were not interested in Black being free politically, socially, economically, what have you. They were only interested in us spending money and our ability to spend money with their products and services. So they weren't interested in us utilizing our economic might in order to address our needs. So we've really got to be aware of that when we speak on that so generally.
And another thing that usually when people are bringing this up, they are on the other side of that using it as an example in a way that the model minorities are using. Mm-hmm. The Asians are using this, the Arabs are using this, the Jewish communities are using this. All minority groups or disenfranchised groups are using this economic power to gain political power. And really, they don't really need voting. They have political power because they have the money to do it, and we're not pulling our money together. And it's your fault, Black community.
To some degree, that's true. But when you factor in history, then you realize it's just a very limited argument. But if you're caught in the perceptions of your life, and people generally use 10 to maybe 20 years to see the circumference of what they're looking at, mm-hmm. that makes sense. But when you go to the 1830s or 1840s or 1850s or 1860s or 1870s, where Irish Americans weren't allowed to be in some stores, Irish Americans were complained about for their men not being present in families. Irish people were complained about their children being wild and in the streets and in gangs. Does any of this sound familiar? But when by the 1960s, when Irish people began being integrated socially, economically, politically into whiteness, these problems, particular to Irish people, sort of disappeared. Though you don't hear the complaints about them as you did 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. But the very same things that are levied against Black people, the historically despised group in America, where Irish and Italians and Greeks were once treated similarly, Xing out the issue of slavery, but they were highly discriminated against because they weren't considered white. Once they began to be considered as white, the negative terminology, you can see this in the 70s television shows. You can go back and see it. They use negative terminology to describe them, but by the 80s and 90s, you don't hear them as much. Or if they do appear in television shows or movies, they're quips and jokes, but not serious pejorative terminology used to denigrate them. So this transition happened, and they appeared to be having things in their community, particularly economics, because they're able to have them. They were sectioned off in the 40s and 50s so that they would not cause so much terror, while those things were denied to Blacks, meaning that they were allowed to cohabitate and dominate in the police area and fire departments as a payoff to get them to settle down and be, comparable citizens. Those weren't done for Black folks. And again, if you just have a life where you just look at 20 years of your existence, you see what is now, and you say, well, they just made things work in their community. No, things were given to them to help things work in their community. And then when they were finally accepted as white, all those negative things we hear so much today about Black folks, especially since we started going to the cities and being able to take advantage of welfare programs that help get a majority of white people into the middle class, you have the same dynamic, except they want us to stay here. And the ADOS movement says, we're not going to stay here.
That's right. So your economic power, if you're working with the ADOS movement, is going to be reparations. So join us, meet up with us, whether it's local or nationally, get some political education and figure out that it's more than just voting. It's You were locked out of America, and getting economic power moving forward is going to mean reparations.
Ashe. This week in ADOS history, we give listeners a chance to know the strides ADOS made despite efforts to keep us bottom cast. From the week of August 29th through September 4th, we have
August 30th, 1800. The Gabriel Prosser-led slave rebellion is stopped before it can start because of bad weather and betrayal by two slaves who told their white masters of the impending revolt. Gabriel had meticulously planned the rebellion and organized an estimated 1,000 slaves to participate in an attack on Richmond, Virginia. One historian described the 24-year-old 6'3" rebel as a fellow of courage and intellect above his rank in life. After the betrayal, Gabriel and 15 of his co-conspirators were hanged on October 10, 1800. Note, most history texts refer to him as Gabriel Prosser, but although he was a slave of Thomas Prosser, there is no indication that he ever used Prosser as his last name.
September 3rd, 1838. Frederick Douglass escapes from slavery on Maryland's eastern shore using so-called free papers and disguising himself as a sailor. He would go on to become the most prominent anti-slavery activist and black leader of his day. He is perhaps best remembered for his now famous 1857 quote, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." Free papers were documents normally required to be in the possession of all free blacks. But one freedom tactic employed during slavery was for a slave to somehow borrow the papers of a free black who fits his or her general description and use the papers to escape from slavery. Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org. You can also get more information on the ADOS movement, our politics, and the agenda. Please visit ADOS101.com. In today's Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have
Corporate America agrees Black Lives Matter. What comes next? Tagline in a recent Deal Book forum, Times journalists took stock of how much the country's most powerful companies are backing up statements against systemic racism. From the publication, The New York Times. Author and writer, The New York Times staff. In Adela Book Debrief live at home conversation earlier this month, the columnist Andrew Ross Sorkin talked about some of those measures with Nicole Hannah-Jones, a domestic correspondent for the New York Times Magazine and the lead creator of the 1619 Project, which examines the consequences of slavery. These are edited excerpts. In the wake of the killing of George Floyd in police custody, are the things that you're seeing businesses do meaningful? It depends on the business. It's easy to say Black Lives Matter. It's easy to put statements out. And I do think symbolism is important. But we also know that if this moment is really going to be transformative, symbols are not going to be enough. I think about a place like Sephora. Its leaders committed to really setting targets to diversify their supplier chain to promote and help more Black businesses and Black entrepreneurs to get shelf space, and also committed to looking at their own corporate structure. Who was being hired? Whom do they have in higher levels of management? I think those things are more substantial. I graded this article okay. Up next.
from the publication Black Agenda Report, entitled Freedom Rider, Democrats are officially Republicans. Tagline, the Democrats claim to be the opposition party, but they seek out Republicans, hate the left of their own party, and don't seem to care if they lose the election. From writer Margaret Kimberly. Even a cursory observation of the recent Democratic National Convention proves that this assessment is correct. There were paeans of love to the late warmonger John McCain, and even an appearance from his widow. A special segment was set aside for Republicans like John Kasich, whose speech was used in part to beat down progressives and make clear that Joe Biden wants nothing to do with them. Not to be outdone with Kasich and McCain's ghost, war criminal Colin Powell was dragged out to put the bipartisan imperialist seal of approval on Biden. Lest we forget, Barack Obama once declared himself to be a moderate Republican. Not that he needed to say it after repeatedly proclaiming his admiration for Ronald Reagan. There should be no surprise that his party now dispenses with any pretense. If Democrats choose to vote for Biden, it should be with honesty and eyes open. There will be no holding feet to the fire, moving anyone left, or expecting Medicare for all or a minimum wage increase. A Republican will be inaugurated president in January 2021. No one should expect anything different. I graded this article excellent. Ms. Kimberly's mirrors my exact assessment. The Democratic Party is Republican. The Democratic Party could care less if they win the presidency given their top of the ticket candidates, since they have many of the same donors as Republican Trump is such an easy villain to wag their fingers at for a public which still hates Trump more than our children, while Democrats vote for most of his measures. Obama did admit that he was a Reagan Republican, as he advocated for Republican policies. Telling many of our people this, who remain drunk on Obama's lies, priceless. And next,
Cornel West, Nina Turner, others plan convention to discuss breaking away from Dem Party and corporate Confederacy politics. From the publication The Mogul Nation, author and writer Ann Brown. The Democratic National Convention just wrapped up to good reviews, and the Republican National Convention is set to start August 24th. After that, there will be a third convention, the People's Convention, which has been organized by and for disaffected progressives. It will take place from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on August 30th and will be broadcast live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. A lineup of heavy-hitting progressives, including author and professor Cornel West, self-help author and former presidential hopeful Marianne Williamson, and Nina Turner, former co-chairman of the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign. All three have spoken out against the Joe Biden campaign. In fact, Turner recently said voting for Biden would be like eating half a bowl of shit. I graded this article good. Initially, this piqued my interest. However, a little further research and some of the coalitions that this progressive party has may not be on the same page as ADOS. So I want to wait and see who's funding it, number one, and see what their overall agenda is. If the two can align with ADOS, this may be a good match for us. This may be a party that we could see ourselves aligning with. And up next,
from the publication The Seattle Times, entitled Black Panther, star Chadwick Boseman dies of cancer at 43. Writer Ryan Pearson. Actor Chadwick Boseman, who played Black icons Jackie Robinson and James Brown with searing intensity before finding fame as the regal Black Panther in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, died Friday of cancer. His representative said he was 43. Boseman died at his home in Los Angeles area with his wife and family by his side. Boseman was diagnosed with colon cancer 4 years ago, his family said in a statement. Quoting, "A true fighter, Chadwick preserved through it all, and brought you many of the films you have come to love so much," his family said. From Marshall to The Five Bloods, August Wilson's Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and several more. All were filmed during and between countless surgeries and chemotherapy. It was the honor of his career to bring King T'Challa to life in Black Panther. Boseman had not spoken publicly about his diagnosis. He is survived by his wife and a parent and had no children. I graded this story good. And next,
thousands of complaints do little to change police ways. Tagline: efforts to hold problem officers accountable face resistance from unions, and juries are reluctant to second guess. From the publication The New York Times, author and writer Shalia Duane and Serge Kowalski. In nearly 2 decades with the Minneapolis Police Department, Derek Chauvin faced at least 17 misconduct complaints, none of which derailed his career. Over the years, civilian review boards came and went, and Federal Review recommended that the troubled department improve its system for flagging problematic officers. All the while, Mr. Chauvin tussled with the man before firing 2 shots, critically wounding him. He was admonished for using derogatory language and demeaning tone with the public. He was named in a brutality lawsuit, but he received no discipline other than 2 letters of reprimand. It was not until Mr. Chauvin, 44, was seen in a video with his left knee pinned to the neck of a black man, prone for nearly 9 minutes and pleading for relief, that the officer, who was white, was suspended, fired, and then on Friday charged with murder. His case is not unusual. Critics say the department, despite its long history of accusations of abuse, never fully put in place federal recommendations to overhaul the way in which it tracks complaints and punishes officers, with just a handful over the years facing termination or severe punishment. I graded this article good. Up next,
From the publication, Dalit Camera, entitled, Indian Racism Towards Black People is Almost Worse Than White People's Racism. An interview with Arundhati Roy. Tagline, we ourselves live in a pretty sick society that seems incapable of feelings of sisterhood, brotherhood, and solidarity. Written by Dalit Camera staff. Dalit Camera asks the question, how do we support the movement in the U.S. and how does one show solidarity with people protesting in India? Arundhati Roy responds, I'm assuming that you mean the massive protests that have erupted over the cold-blooded killing of George Floyd, the latest in a series of killings of African Americans by white American police. I would say that the best way of supporting that movement is to understand where it comes from. First of all, the history of slavery, racism, the civil rights movement, its successes and failures, the crude as well as subtle ways in which African Americans in North America are brutalized, incarcerated, disenfranchised within the framework of democracy, and to understand the role that the majority of the Indian community in the U.S. has played in all of this. Who has it traditionally aligned itself with? Dalit Camera reporter asks, we see Indians trending Black Lives Matter, but in this very country, we find continuous attacks on blacks. How do Indians see blacks, or what stereotype do we Indians have of them? Arundhati Roy responds, look at the Indian obsession with fair skin. It is one of the most sickening things about us. If you watch Bollywood movies, you'd imagine India was a country of white folks. Indian racism towards black people is almost worse than white people's racism. It's unbelievable. I've seen it happen on the streets when I've been with black friends, and sometimes it comes from people whose skin color is really no different. Rarely have I been so enraged and ashamed that racism has manifested in outright attacks. I graded this interview excellent. Motivates me to ask two questions of Kamala Harris. Her mother's family is known to be a part of the Brahmin high caste in India. Are Miss Harris and her family known for advocating for the black Dalits there? With whom does Miss Harris, her Indian family that live here in America, align with? Black Americans or whites? According to Arundhati Roy, this is important. And next,
Postal Service cuts imperial ladder to middle class for many black Americans. Tagline, postal workers say DeJoy's policies would make it nearly impossible to cope with sweeping changes that are affecting their jobs every day. From the publication Politico.com, author and writers Eleanor Mueller and Kelly Medrich. Jonathan Smith, a black mail processing equipment mechanic who joined the U.S. Postal Service in 1988, remembers his grandfather being so proud of his career and at the agency that he wore his uniform even when he wasn't working. That job made us part of the middle class, said Smith, 51, whose aunts and uncles also built careers at the post office. For many black Americans, he said, the Postal Service is that last symbol of power of the middle class. That ticket to economic security could be in jeopardy now if President Donald Trump and Congress fail to resolve their fight over Postal Service funding. It won't just be the agency's financial future at risk. It could imperil one of the country's longest running and most reliable civil service jobs, potentially forcing steep cuts to estimated 669,000 person workforce that is more than one quarter black, a rate more than double that of the national labor force. I graded this article good, and I implore everyone to continue to support the U.S. Postal Service. And up next,
from the publication Black Agenda Report, entitled, To Ignore Political Prisoners is Hypocrisy. Tagline, Jihad Abdulmumin, a co-chair of the Jericho Movement, the political prisoners support organization. Abdulmumin was addressing a Black is Back Coalition National Conference on Political Prisoners. Writer, Jihad Abdulmumin. What exactly we can do to support our freedom fighters that are in prison at this particular time. So when we talk about movement in the real sense of the term, We've got to be talking about the solidification of solidarity needed to do an actual plan of work, of doing more than just picking up the baton that has been dropped for almost 2 decades or more, after they died due to the demolition of the Black liberation movement by the counterintelligence program. What time is being picked up? And I want to say, sisters and brothers, that any movement that professes to champion human rights of poor and oppressed people, any movement that professes to challenge and combat police violence against our people, any movement as we see today bringing radical changes to society that does not incorporate at the top of the list the freedom fighters that have went before them is hypocritical. I graded this excellent. For the full conference address, please follow the link in our show notes. And next,
Obama advisors Axelrod. Biden wanted to run double white with white women VP from Michigan, but caved to pressure. From the publication The Mogul Nation, from author and writer Dana Sanchez. Joe Biden seriously considered choosing a running mate other than Kamala Harris, but went with her under pressure as the do no harm candidate, according to David Axelrod, senior advisor to President Barack Obama and chief strategist for the 2008 and 2012 Obama presidential campaigns. Harris famously targeted Biden in the first primary debate 14 months ago over his position on mandatory school busing in the 1970s. As a child, Harris said she benefited from busing. Her challenge shot her briefly to the top of the polls and was a source of friction with Biden and his family that could have upended his choice, Axelrod wrote in a CNN opinion piece. Pressure for Biden to choose a black woman or a woman of color has been building since George Floyd's killing by a Minneapolis police officer triggered nationwide protests over racial inequity, Axelrod wrote. And beyond the historic nature of Harris' selection, many supporters argue that the presence of a person of color on the ticket was necessary to motivate black voters. Tepid turnout by black voters in 2016 helped doom Hillary Clinton in her race against Donald Trump. I graded this article good. And by the way, we knew Biden opened his big mouth and made promises that he did not want to keep, but was forced to. And I don't know what is tepid about a turnout when you can get 90 to 95% of the black vote we turned out for Hillary Clinton. Other communities did not. I'm sorry, I gotta say it. I'm sorry. I gotta say it. Yvette Antone said we cannot let white voters get off the hook for what they did. They put Donald Trump in the office. You overwhelmingly voted for him. Now it's overwhelmingly your turn, if you want him out, to vote him out. I was being real politically correct, right? With the, you know who you are. No, you are who you are. You voted for Trump. If you want him out, you get him out. We're okay. Either way, our community is the same, with or without Trump. Get it together if you want him out. Save your own selves from your own president that you chose. I'm sorry, I'm off on a rant here, and we in rapping news. Sorry.
It's okay.
And
I understand.
Up next.
From the publication, USAWatchdog.com, entitled Catherine Austin Fitts, We Are Watching the Mother of All Debt Entrapments. Tagline, Catherine Austin Fitts has a huge global perspective. She has managed as much as $300 billion for the government as Assistant Housing Secretary. She is a financial advisor in demand all over the world. Interviewed by Greg Hunter. Greg Hunter asks, I want to start with the Great Reset, where the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, has been talking about how we need to have a reset during a meeting with the Davos crowd. Catherine Austin Fitts responds, so we see first meeting of the central bankers in Jackson Hole, which is August 2019. So that's the first meeting all the central bankers came together. At the same time, the Bank of England governor came out, did an interview with Jackson Hole saying the world needs a global mechanism. The dollar's not working and we need to shift to a global mechanism. So basically what you've seen clearly, a decision was made to just go ahead and do it. And what are we seeing in September? The Fed moved to intervene in the repo market. Since then, if you look at the last 12 months, massive programs of literally the Fed buying the market. As that happens, the World Economic Forum website comes out and announces the Great Reset. So what we are seeing is a re-engineering of the global financial system. We see a lot of smart money get out of the market at the top in January, February, and then in March. A push used to basically use police powers created through the healthcare system to shut down huge parts of the independent economy globally. I graded this interview excellent. Please refer to more details in the interview, which corroborated Articles of ADOS episode 21 article, Lockdowns, Coronavirus, and Banks, Following the Money, where I offered supplemental information as to how I noticed a crash of the repo markets that required lots of liquidity, cash injections, to a tune of nearly $7 trillion by December of 2019, which continued into such liquidity, cash injections, to a tune announced by the Fed as sometimes requiring $1 trillion a day. Yet by then, the white domination racist capitalist media was making it seem as though it was caused by COVID-19. Thank you to W.E. White for contributing the interview.
Before I move on, that had me, I was like, oh
Yes.
my God, this explains it.
It does. And it was during that month of August, June, July, August, that we started getting those reports of the vaping problems it was causing on the chest, what has the same results as COVID-19.
Yep.
See, that's what they don't want when they scare people away. Like, oh, you're just conspiracy theorists. It's to get people not to think and connect the dots.
Wow.
And people are not going to hear this because they're so locked into the belief systems they've created about COVID-19. I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Welcome to my world since 2000.
Wow.
And next?
Charlamagne and Diddy sold out black voters for Kamala Harris. From the YouTube channel TD Hip Hop Media, author and writer Tony Delorme. About 2 days prior to Joe Biden selecting Senator Kamala Harris as his vice president pick, a statement was released to the press titled "More than 100 Black Male Leaders Signed Statement of Solidarity Requiring a Black Woman Vice President. #Win with Black Women." Now, this statement was plastered all over the mainstream media, in which they were applauding these so-called 100 black male leaders for standing in solidarity with black women to get a black female vice president. It's nothing more than a Kamala Harris bluff piece. That's all this was. It was a statement more so in order to get black Americans on board with the fact that Kamala Harris was going to be vice president. They knew she was going to be the vice president pick before it came out publicly. That's why this statement was released prior to Joe Biden making his selection. The modern black celebrity of today is really nothing more than a Democratic tool to walk black Americans off of a political cliff. On the list, Sean Diddy Combs and Charlamagne the God, these individuals have adopted the lingo and the rhetoric surrounding reparations in the black agenda. In order to gain your trust and to make you believe that on a mainstream level they are championing what you want and what you need, and that they are for you. But when push comes to shove, they don't toe the line for you as it pertains to reparations in the black agenda. They sell you short for tokenisms and symbolisms. I graded this video excellent. Up next,
From the publication Truth in Media, entitled Facebook Fact Checker Bought and Paid For by Gates Foundation. Writer Ben Swan. Who are the so-called Facebook fact checkers? Well, it turns out they're nothing more than propagandists who are being funded in many cases by the very people that are being fact-checked by journalists. What do I mean by that? How about this name, Bill Gates? Turns out he has a web of influence and financial backing of the so-called fact-checking organizations, which, as it turns out, according to the Columbia Journalism Review, they have been whitewashing his history. So-called fact checkers are essentially blocking stories from being shared or even viewed by the public. Stories that in many cases talk about the coronavirus or are critical of either the national response of Dr. Anthony Fauci or of vaccines or Bill Gates himself. Dr. David Martin is one of the main voices in Plandemic 2, Indoctrination, where he has been called a liar by these fact checkers, as well as a conspiracy theorist and someone who is peddling misinformation to the masses. Yet for his part, Dr. Martin says he has all of the source information available. So this is an interesting opinion checking, but not fact checking that they are doing. We did invite the Poynter Institute, USA Today, and PolitiFact fact checkers from all of those organizations to have a one-on-one debate with Dr. David Martin. They have declined. Each one of them has said they're either too busy or not interested. We're not really surprised. Having said all that, it is important to know that Children's Self-Defense, an organization run by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has now filed a RICO lawsuit against Facebook and its fact checkers, claiming that they are engaged in conspiracy and racketeering. I graded this report excellent. Review this report in total, where you'll find how Gates has been effectively hiding his atrocities of mass sterilizations and serious injuries upon children on the continent of Africa and in India. It is Gates' influence media apparatus you are relying on to make your decisions of what is real. And next,
Should employers force workers to get COVID-19 vaccines? Some experts say yes. From the publication The Columbus Dispatch, author and writer Nathan Boomey of USA Today. Employers grappling with COVID-19's impact on the workplace may soon be forced to make another tough decision after months of agonizing over layoffs, furloughs, and the right strategies to keep their businesses afloat during the pandemic. The next challenge? Should they require workers to take vaccines? Some companies concerned about liability issues, health, and safety may need to decide whether to force their employees to get vaccinated if they want to continue working or return to the office, experts say. And some experts are already calling on employers to make it mandatory, which they say would generally be legal. But others caution against mandates, saying that they could backfire by making Americans more resistant to a vaccine they've already concerned about, and more likely to embrace anti-vaxxer sentiment. I graded this article good, and the information somewhat problematic. Forced vaccines are never the answer. And up next,
from the publication Mother Jones, entitled, Here's How Kenosha Cops Will Try to Get Away with Nearly Murdering Jacob Blake. Tagline, the police union released its version of events. In a more humane world, it'd be a confession. Writer Samantha Michaels. Somewhat predictably, the Kenosha Police Union has come to the defense of the officer who shot Jacob Blake 7 times in the back last weekend and in front of his young children. In a statement released on Friday, the Kenosha Professional Police Association argued that officers drew their guns because Blake was allegedly armed with a knife, had actively resisted the officers' attempt to gain compliance, and remained unaffected by their tasers. As the uncontested facts above demonstrate, the officers involved gave Mr. Blake numerous opportunities to comply. Brenda Matthews, an attorney for the union, wrote in the statement, seemingly attempting to blame Blake for the outcome. He chose not to. Even if Blake had resisted officers and did have a knife in his possession somewhere, that shouldn't be a justification for offloading 7 rounds into his back as he was walking away from them towards his kids. The fact that police officers in Kenosha think this is a colorable excuse is a reminder of how twisted our system of accountability and justice is. Police officers around the country have made similar excuses after other instances of police brutality, and they tend to work. Around the country, with the help of judges and prosecutors, officers have regularly gotten away with shooting people who were unarmed. Some were sleeping in a car or sleeping at home on a couch, because laws in most states allow cops to use deadly force if they can come up with a reason for why they thought a person in their vicinity might harm them, even if they were wrong and the person posed no real threat. I graded this article good. And that's it for this week's Rapid News. All articles featured will be posted in our Facebook group and in the show notes on our website. Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life.
Time now for the main event.
In this week's main event, we will present the letter entitled Open Letter from the original Black Panther Party members to Black hip hop artists who have an interest in our community. Written by Kathleen Cleaver, Sikau Odinga, Cleo Silvers, Jamal Joseph, Yasmin Majid, Victor Houston, Paula Peebles, Bilal Sunni Ali, Jihad Mumit, Daruba bin Wahad. Greetings and solidarity to each of you. In recognition of your individual voice, influence, and cultural following among current generations of Black people, Africans in the diaspora, and on the continent, we salute you. While we only know you from the public domain, we know that many of you come from backgrounds where you faced poverty, police brutality, lack of health care, and other forms of oppression like most Black people. We all recognize that we are in a watershed period of economic and government failure, a pandemic, and now a resistance movement from which things will never emerge the same. What we all do in this period will directly impact the fortunes, survival, and freedom dreams of Black people and others around the world who suffer from the same oppression, whether it's South American favelas, South African shantytowns, Palestinian territories, or the Black urban ghettos of racist America. Capitalism and white supremacy has turned the entire world into a ghetto for the profits of a few. So we should pay attention to each other, because here in the heart of racist America, we are all we have, and along with our true allies, are truly all we need. Individually, we who write this letter are former members of the original Black Panther Party, co-founded in 1966 by the late Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale in Oakland, California. We were targets of the FBI's infamous counterintelligence program, codenamed COINTELPRO, which killed many of our comrades, including Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, and numerous other Panthers and revolutionary freedom fighters. We are veterans of government search and destroy missions that forced our beloved comrade Assata Shakur into exile. We are former Black political prisoners who spent decades in U.S. prisons, like our comrades Sundiata Acoli, Jalil Montekim, and Mumia Abu Jamal, who are still locked down today. In short, we were on the front line of government efforts to kill and destroy the Black radical movements of civil human rights, including the right of self-determination. Some of us were also racist law enforcement's worst nightmare, armed combatants in the revolutionary Black Underground, the Black Liberation Army, BLA. Much of our history in our people's struggle has been kept away from you and seemingly unavailable to your generation as you reinvent what was done in the past. Our people's enemies haven't changed. Circumstances and conditions have. History never repeats itself, but it damn sure can rhyme. The question is, where do we, Black people, oppressed peoples, go from here? What is to be done? Make no mistake, we are still at war. A war that began when, as Malcolm said, Plymouth Rock landed on us, and it has continued to this day unabated. It is our duty as revolutionary freedom fighters to pass on lessons, wisdom, knowledge, and experiences to the next generation of freedom fighters, cultural workers, and activists. In that manner, an oppressed people can resist domination from one generation to the next without reinventing failures, pitfalls, or the mistakes of the previous generation. It is our enemy's job to prevent this and isolate one generation from the other. It is their duty to denigrate the history of militant and radical traditions and burnish the history of integrationists who think we can simply vote our way out of this problem. It is for this reason that we have stepped forward at this neo-fascist moment in history, driven by the current crisis of capitalist culture, an ongoing pandemic, and the now renewed attention and massive demonstrations brought on by ongoing police murders in our community. We have chosen to focus this letter on you because our enemies constantly target you to help calm the people down. They hope your new class status will outweigh your racial and class analysis. You have a chance to prove them wrong, and with your resources and influence, you can be crucial to the collective survival of our people. Tattoos, expensive cars, and private jets don't inoculate anyone from a disease and don't render you bulletproof. We have to collectively provide for our own human agency and not delude ourselves into thinking it's safer to integrate into a malign system of greed and dehumanization. Some may say we as Panther veterans are not the black people you should be seen talking to. Niggas should know their place, we've been told, and this is one reason that powerless black folks have sports figures, actors, musicians, and brought off politicians as their public opinion makers. The voices of the disenfranchised is only heard when they rage against the machine that has ground down their lives. We have all been encouraged by the energy of the black masses and our allies in protesting the murder of George Floyd. But as each of you are well aware, the murder and brutality visited upon our people is nothing aberrational or new. The butchering, torture, and dehumanization of black people extends back to the days of bullwhips, castrations, and mass rape on the plantations of America's European founding fathers and continues to this day. This is the legacy from which modern law enforcement in America derived its overreaching purpose, the protection of property and wealth, not people, especially not black people. No amount of training, social sensitivity, counseling, or smaller police forces will change the current impact of this history on law enforcement. Only our control of public safety in our communities will break this historical context for modern law enforcement. This begins with decentralization of the police and community control of public safety. This reason of political struggle is indeed about the ballot and the bullet. To organize the former ballot, all progressive and radical forces in America need to come together in a united front against fascism and the militarized police state. This is what the BPP did at the height of the tumultuous 60s, resulting in delaying the outright consolidation of right-wing racist takeover of American foreign and domestic policy. We must also look beyond solutions that are strictly based on legislative reform, voting, or individual capitalist enterprises. Black folks must survive institutional racist paradigms of power and exercise political and social self-determinant power. The public platforms each of you have can go a long way in creating this tactical and strategic organizing vision. With this in mind, we ask you who have a certain sway over the attitudes and minds of today's black youth to do the following. Let's meet and talk through a strategy based on liberating black people in our respective roles. Help create new cooperative enterprises where ownership is shared and it's directed towards the needs of our people, not consumerist enterprises. Support radical and revolutionary black organizations that have a history of accomplishment and institution building in our community that is independent of major corporate donations, government grants, or foundation funding. Through your media reach, support the current rebellion in the streets and mass organizing for radical change. If you are opposed to property destruction, then call for massive demonstrations at key government and private installations and give free concerts to ensure large numbers of people come out. Work with us and others to create and fund an independent black political platform and candidates with radical demands for black control and redistribution of this country's wealth and reparations. Let us create a Black Red Cross where we become our own first responders in times of natural or man-made disasters, pandemics. Fight for the demilitarization and the decentralization of the police where the local community through local boards control the hiring, firing, and disciplining of police in their community. Let us create a system of not only a new policing paradigm, but one where we create a community restorative justice and end the prison industrial complex. These are just some of the things we can do to create a united black liberation front to challenge our oppressive conditions in the United States and erase the class divide between the overwhelming majority of our people and those few like yours who have some wealth and influence. This is all our opportunity to do what's best for our people and be on the right side of history. This letter was written by the original Black Panther members. Well, that completes the reading of this brilliant letter. Listeners, you can read it on our website in this week's show notes. Coming up, we have the commentary on this letter. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned.
We want to take the time to give our friends and listeners a shout out. Thank you for clicking that subscribe button and for liking and sharing the podcast. You can also continue supporting the show by joining our Patreon, where you can receive exclusive content and promotional items for as little as $3 a month. Sponsoring the show will ensure that we can continue to bring you the news and information important to your ADOS life. So head on over and join us at patreon.com/articles of ADOS. So I'd like to give a shout out to our new Patreon, Zoli Moore. Thank you for being a supporter of the show. Thank you for listening. And hopefully we'll continue to bring you great content that you'll love every week. So, what do you think of the letter from the original Black Panthers?
Fascinating. I absolutely love it. It was originally posted in June 11th, and I believe Cynthia McKinney, former representative, posted it again. And so I was really, happy about that and hoped that would also get out to the people that are out there. It would have been great had this arrived on the scene when that clash happened 9 months or so ago. But it's right on time, I believe, given all that's going on in the society. It made a particular call, which was great, from people that should already have respect, and some of the foolishness that goes from a lack of respect from people that are trying to point the way. This goes right to our discussion that you started us off with today in terms of, checking our personalities. We have an opportunity here to align the collective with respective members who fought for our freedoms and who are still suffering, many of them. And this is a way to organize a more precise and fashionable effort to have more direct results. I love the fact, and some people could look at some of the letter elements and say, well, ADOS is all about, legal justice claim, therefore rights, therefore legislation. They're not speaking against that. They're just saying we should not put all of our eggs in that basket. So it's not a criticism. It is telling everybody that this takes a multitude of approaches, and we've got talented people that they attempted in this letter to sort of organize themselves by making suggestions as to what we can be doing now. But first and foremost, we've got to better organize what talents, what interests, and what capabilities we all have, despite the levels of misery index we've talked about before, that is ever increasing. And we need to do this thing. This is one of the things we need to do in order to stave off that misery index, where we'll have so much misery, but so little people able to respond. Here, they're calling for, these warriors are calling for us to organize better. That's all, and be more precise. So I love this letter. I'm glad that it's out there, and I'm hopeful that they're hearing from these people, and that's everybody. Also, I have to also say this will get rid of some of the silliness that we've noticed when people are going off track. Some would say off code, or even accusations of people being off code when they're not being off code. Some of that silliness will be automatically thrusted by the wayside. So that's what I like about this letter and the call of these warriors, getting people to come on board and sharpen up our message, sharpen up our approach, sharpen up our impact on getting whatever we deserve in this society.
What I liked about the article is that the letter speaks to how they were marginalized, how their voices were basically, number one, cut out of history and cut out of the history that you know. Mm-hmm. They're telling the hip hop artists, like, listen, you don't even know who we are. And that's because COINTELPRO, that's because it was a systemic war against any black radical voices. And what made their voices radical was saying we should be free. Police brutality should stop. We should take care of the poor. We should educate the kids. Normal humanity made them radical.
That's crazy.
And so they have to explain this to the hip hop community, the hip hop artists. Look, you might not even know who we are, other than, of course, we know who Huey P. Newton is. We know, the famous faces of the Black Panther Party. But the names that were listed on this letter, maybe we don't know them. Mm-hmm. I liked how they gave them the history of who they were and why for the most part, that they may not know them personally, but this is the work we did. This is what we're doing, and this is how you can help. And I don't know, did you do any searches and see whether or not any hip hop artists respond?
No, not as yet. And I purposely did so because I really wanted this to go out to our listeners as they're already being activated. Mm-hmm. My hope is that other people will listen to this and come. I'm hopeful that our listeners will encourage our leadership, whether it be a national or local level, as well as other groups. Challenge them to answer this call. I'm going to check now and hopefully report in the future how many have responded to this call, because I think it's valid and it's much needed.
That's it for our commentary on today's main event. Check back next week for another great event and information we know you'll need. ADOS Showcase, where we get to share ADOS related talents and gifts. Last week we had the honor of introducing Aria Ilan. This week we showcase Prince Zila, a hip-hop artist with a message I know you'll love.
Heavy soul, heavy hearted, the weight of these days among us. The faith is fleeing, I see it, we praying. They praying on us, plotting on ways to be owners. They plotting on ways to own us and been killing us against disabled to hold they phone up. That angry, that paranoia, it's like they got us right where they want us. I play my post with the patience, he gon' throw us. Postpone it, I love it, cause power can seize nothing without a struggle. We drip with the blood of Jesus and Michael Phelps through these puddles. Know yourself through these troubles, I'm subtle. No crying tears, dodging doctors, supplying fear, letting God steer the Zion's here. They used to question God intent from the way that these eyes is bent. When I reflected on why I'm here, but see the connection of why it's clear. I fear itself and look in the mirror and see it clearer. My features that of a God when the cripple us, cause they fear us to cut through the thick tension. We take pills and sip liquors and blowing so much loud can hit the angels that assist us. I'm slipping, but then the workings of the beneficent, merciful lifting me, spitting these versatile verses serving purposeful. Sacrifice was personal. It got a strange hold, the game cold. I pray I speak and change souls. I mean a strange. It got a strange hold, like when that officer, probably a Klansman, when he changed clothes, stood on that man neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds with a face expression that remained cold. I'm talking about a strange hold, physically, metaphorically, economically. Only on our roads that ain't roads, since roads ain't roads from front rows, since slaves put escape roads and corn rows been scoring though. I mean a strange hold, I mean a crack cocaine hold, or Coco Bane mode, we call it gang mode. Quick to let it rain, no, the same with no shame, no. To a process where that flame go, won't apply the same, no. Same jungle, same crow. I swear I got a strange hold. And anybody with a brain knows the institution, the housing, child support, prison, war on drugs, poverty, disease, obviously. Knew it would have a strange hold on we. Cripple the man, vain the mind of the woman, control the mind of the youth, make them spineless, wanting for nothing. A strange like off hold, a Eric Gordon at the store type of strange hold. And see him with reform and legislation far as change goes. But anybody with a brain knows reparation is the only liberation. Won't nobody drop that name, no. Though mentally they got a strange hold, make you think it ain't possible, make you feel insane, no. The world screaming justice, it's time to mentally let them chains go. The birth of this idea could only come from the street. A bunch of yous and me's, no above ease. What a perfect time, plagues and viruses got a strange hold, no distractions, so let's do it properly. How we compensate people under our constitution if we take their property, but not people once considered property. If politicians don't support, sound like an optomy. If businesses don't support, won't get this bought from me. That black dollar got a strange hold on the economy. We need economic plans of action, no apologies to acknowledge me. Ain't no justice, no peace, but jail ain't worse than hell, so just pray you on the right side of karma, America. Cause on this side, God got a strange hold on our minds, hearts, and hands to do what we was trained for. Momentum up, don't let this thing go. March, ride, Luke burn shit if that's the cost to turn the issue to this American dream we never had a turn with. Every turn twist is a twist turn into a strange hole. It's time to let go. Reparations is the only liberation. They don't ever drop that name, no. Drop that name, no.
And that was A Strange Hold by Prince Zila. You can find him on YouTube and princezila.com. And remember, all artists will be featured in the show notes on our webpage.
We're coming to get our check.
There you have it, another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list and see the show notes for today's episode.
Be sure to tune in next Friday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com.
And remember, you can catch us live at 10 a.m. every Friday on WCRS 92.7 and 98.3 here in Columbus, Ohio. Also head over to our Patreon page to support the podcast as we give you weekly news and information important to our community. Until next time, family, stay safe and stay strong. Peace.
We're coming to get our check. 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 We're coming to get our check.